Welcome to the first of a new quarter's worth of lessons. This lesson is on altars and sacrifices, and we'll be learning lots about those, and they did a lot of that in the last quarter as well. The whole quarter is written by George Estes, and he's a wonderful, wonderful Cumberland Presbyterian minister, and I think we're going to really benefit greatly from his work. Today we are going to be in Genesis, and we're going to be reading a very, very familiar story, and that is the story of Cain and Abel. And it's kind of appropriate that I'm out here at my farm because Cain and Abel are about a farmer and a shepherd, of course. I'm really here because I forgot and left my tripod at home, and so I couldn't record at church. But our farm here is really a hobby farm, and our horses that we have are horses that are not for us to eat, obviously, even though sometimes I tease Lee and say, if things get bad enough, we always can. We are growing this summer 2 tomato plants, 2 okra plants, and a cucumber plant. Certainly not enough to feed us for the whole summer. This is our hobby. And yet for Cain and Abel, of course, their livelihood was, in Cain's instance, farming the ground, tending the ground, tilling the ground, and getting fruits and vegetables from the soil, and Abel in being a shepherd. And so let's hear that very familiar story. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. And that is what his name means, actually. Next she bore her brother, his brother Abel. And the word Abel actually just means vapor or mist. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock the fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Cain said to his brother Abel, Let us go out into the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And you are now cursed, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face, and I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer, hi there, Comet, on the earth. And anyone who meets me may kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a 7-fold vengeance. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod in the east of Eden. You're really not a whole lot of help, buddy. Okay, so I want to begin by saying you may know there is no fight like a church fight except maybe a family fight. That's one of the things that George Estes says in our lesson this morning or for today. And this really has the hallmarks of both because it takes place in the context of worship. Cain and Abel are worshiping God, and then Cain is rejected, and that makes him mad. And then the church fight turns into a family fight as Cain kills his little brother Abel. One of the ways that I always remember who killed who is a little device I came up with years ago, and that was Cain killed Abel because Abel wasn't able to. So if you need to have help separating the two out, you can think of that. Well, many of us know from personal experience how painful church fights can be, how painful family fights can be, and you may have suffered from it. You may have been the cause of some of them, and you may know now just how dangerous they can be. Here in Cleveland, where I live, I mean, you really no help at all, buddy. Here in Cleveland, where I live, a man killed his wife recently, and he was arrested. It's obvious he did it. She actually was on the phone with the authorities when he killed her. They could hear from the phone what had happened. And from jail, he tried to hire another inmate who was getting ready to get out to kill his mother-in-law, the evil and the anger that he had towards his wife and her family, and the evil that caused just keeps on growing and growing and growing. And fortunately, the other prisoner told the authorities and did not go out and try to kill the mother-in-law, and so she didn't die. But that really would suggest to us, we might ask the question, where does all of that come from? And we really get the answer right in Genesis, in this early story. It comes right from the human heart. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we're told that there is nothing new under the sun. Here I am out on the sun, and it really is true. There's nothing new under the sun. What we see going on in Genesis, we can see every day, and if we are honest with ourselves, we can see in our own hearts as well. Jesus warns us in the Sermon on the Mount that it is wrong to murder, but even if you're angry with a brother or a sister, you're guilty of murder. Now, he doesn't simply mean a righteous sense of anger, but he does mean if I am so angry with a brother or sister that I really want nothing more to do with them, and maybe even I want some ill to come upon them, maybe even I want them to be killed, or I would be happy if they would die, then Jesus says, you've already committed murder. And it's kind of what God is saying to Cain as well, when God says, sin is crouching at the door, and it's your anger that is the cause of that sin. Your anger is what might let the sin in and cause you to do something that is going to have horrible consequences for you and for other people. It had horrible consequences for Abel. Obviously, it had terrible consequences for Adam and Eve. For one son to kill another son, it's hard to imagine anything worse for a set of parents to have to go through. And yet we also are warned or advised in Scripture that we are to be angry, but to not sin. Be angry, but do not let it be an occasion for sin. And so anger is a human emotion. It's what we do with the anger that's going to be what happens. And there is this. Let's say wonderful. Wonderful is not the right word, but God is so clear. A sin is crouching at your door, and if you give it the opportunity to come in, it's going to come in. And who is it going to harm? Well, it's going to harm other people, but it's also ultimately going to harm you as well. Let's dive a little deeper into the story. So we have here Cain, who is the farmer tilling the ground. We have Abel, who is the shepherd, who is taking care of animals. And both make offerings to God. Now, interestingly, we don't know how they knew they were to make offerings to God. The people of Israel do not exist yet. They have not been given the law at Sinai yet. And we could come to lots of questions right now. Were Cain and Abel real people or not? What is going on here? Is this just a story or a parable or something? Or were they real people? And we could have those discussions. I'd be happy to have those with anybody that wants to. Give me a call. We can have a cup of coffee or have them. But what I really want us to do is take this story very, very seriously, even if we're not going to take it completely literally. Or if we're going to take it literally, let us make sure that we also take it seriously. It's not merely a history, a story for us to have, so we have the facts of history. I read recently a book about the Titanic, and I don't know that I drew any lessons for my life from reading that book. I can give you some historical facts about the Titanic that I didn't have before, but I don't know that it impacted my life in a way that changed me. This story should change us, and that is what is most important, not where it comes from. So here they are, and both make offerings to God. We don't know how they knew that they were to make offerings to God, but they do. In some way they know. And Abel's offering is accepted, and Cain's is rejected. And on the surface, it almost seems like God is being arbitrary, but there is a clue in there. It says that Cain brings some of the fruits of his labor, and that Abel brings the first fruits and the fattest portions of the sheep that he has sacrificed to God. This is not saying that bringing a grain offering or bringing the offering of fruit is not as good as bringing the offering of an animal. What it's saying is, was it the first fruit or not? Not exactly a one-to-one connection, but it kind of makes sense to me. I heard someone years ago, and I thought this was so powerful, say, if your church is doing a food drive and you go into the very back of your pantry and you pull out a couple of cans that are all dented up up and maybe even getting a little bit rusty, and you know you're never going to eat that food. It's been in there for years, and you give that to the food drive, you aren't being generous, and you're actually being cruel. If you give something to a food drive for people who are hungry, that's something you wouldn't even eat yourself, then you're just being cruel. But if you really are being generous, then you're going to give to people something that you yourself would want to eat, maybe even sacrifice something. I could eat this myself, but I'm going to sacrifice this for others, and maybe I'll even eat out of those cans in the back of the pantry to kind of get rid of them, but to give the good stuff to those who are part of the food drive. That's really kind of what's going on here. Cain was participating, but he really wasn't being generous. Abel, out of gratitude for God, maybe recognizing that if it were not for your giving me these sheep and you're allowing them to thrive and flourish, I wouldn't have anything to give. He gives of the first and he gives of the best. A powerful, powerful lesson for us. Well, Cain is angry and his countenance falls, and we can just see him stamping around. He is so angry, and we should really ask, again, what's going on here? And God warns him, be careful where this anger is going to go, because wherever this anger goes, it may be this occasion for sin to come in, and he doesn't really hear that at all. What God really is saying here is the same thing that Joshua will tell the people centuries or millennia from now, and that is, you can choose. You can choose life or you can choose death. And if you choose to sin, if you choose to give in to your baser instincts, if you choose to allow anger or your other emotions to rule your life, then you're giving in to death, and you're going to kill relationships. You may literally kill other people, and it's also going to go badly for you. But if you choose life, then things will go well for you. Well, that doesn't happen at all, of course. Cain does not choose to be angry and not sin. He's angry and he sins. And this is a reminder that oftentimes I think the harder thing is the better thing. It was harder for him, would have been harder for him to resist his anger. It would have been harder for him to give the first fruits of his crops, just as it had to be harder for Abel to give the best that he had to God. And yet doing that was the better thing. It made a difference. That was the better thing when it was the harder thing. You know, the best things in life aren't free. It's also the case that oftentimes the best things in life are things that we have to work for, we have to sacrifice for. And that is true in the ways that we worship. It's true in the ways that we treat other people. It's true in the ways that we handle our emotions. Now, it is interesting to me that Cain's anger ends up being directed towards Abel. What did Abel do? Abel does the right thing, and Cain is mad at him because he did the right thing, and Cain apparently knowingly did not do the right thing. He wasn't as generous as he could have been and should have been, and he's angry at Abel. Cain maybe could have been angry at God. Well, why are you favoring his offering and not mine? This doesn't seem fair, God. But where his anger really should have been was toward himself. And I guarantee you that you have done this from time to time. I know I have. You sin. You do the wrong thing. Someone gets hurt. You are starting to pay the consequences for that sin, and you have a chance to decide. Well, am I going to be angry at them, the person that I wronged? Well, you should have is the first way we often will say, and particularly if we're asking for forgiveness. Well, I did what was wrong, but if you hadn't, and that's really saying this is all your fault. Or do we say, you know what? I'm wrong, and I'm mad at myself. I knew better, and I shouldn't have done that, and I was being stupid, and it's all on me. It's all on my head, and whatever the consequences are, I'm going to have to take. That's where Cain's anger should have been, and when we sin, that's where our anger should be. But instead, Cain is angry towards Abel, and maybe he was jealous. Maybe it was just that Abel was an easy target, and this is where this sin lurking at the door really kind of comes alive, because when we're angry particularly or facing some other strong emotion, our anger starts looking for a target, and we have to be careful that it doesn't hit the wrong target. It's commonly known that when a policeman has to come to somebody's house and inform them that maybe their loved one has died in an accident, that sometimes the person attacks the policeman for for bringing that message. And it's not that they are blaming the policeman for what happened, but their anger needs to find a target, and it just goes to the policeman because he is the easy target. And so that may be what's going on here with Cain and Abel. The little brother becomes an easy target, and so Cain uses him rather than accepting the responsibility for himself. God comes to Cain and says, "What have you done? Where is your brother?" And Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And it really sounds a lot like, on the one hand, that Cain is trying to say, whatever's happened, it's not my fault. He's kind of deflecting the blame away. And it sounds a little bit to me like Jesus does in the parable he tells in Matthew 25 of the sheep and the goats, where the goats say, "God, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or naked or sick or in prison?" Those people that we saw, they weren't our responsibility. We weren't supposed to care for them. We aren't their keeper. You can't blame us that we didn't go and care for them. And of course God says no, because that was me. Because every person who is in need is, at one level or another, your responsibility. You can't just say, "Well, I'm not my brother's keeper. That wasn't my responsibility." This also sounds a little bit like Adam sounded when God confronts Adam with his sin in the Garden of Eden. And Adam says, "That woman that you gave me, God? Well, she's the one that gave me the fruit." And what Adam really is saying is, this is Eve's fault, and even above Eve, this is your fault, God. And that's kind of what Cain is saying as well. If Abel got killed, it was probably his fault, and if it wasn't his fault, it was your fault, God. The Psalm says, now the Psalms weren't written yet, of course, but the psalmist says, "The Lord is my keeper." And here Abel is kind of saying, Cain is kind of saying, you're Abel's keeper. And so if you didn't want Abel to get killed, you should have been doing something about it. You should have been more active. God doesn't buy that, and God says that Abel's blood is actually crying out to me from the ground. And part of what George Estes says is, this is a reminder that God does hear the cries of those who are oppressed. God does hear the cries of those who are needy. Even after Abel is dead, God still hears his cries and is still acting. He says, "Cain, there are going to be consequences for what you have done. You're going to be a fugitive and a wanderer, and you're going to fail if you try to farm." It's very interesting. The ground was cursed in the story of the Garden of Eden, and now it says the ground is going to curse you, and you're not going to be able to farm. And part of what I hear here, in actually real world consequences, this is a curse, and maybe it was a literal curse. From then on out, every time Cain tried to farm, it just fell apart on him. But part of what I hear is, before this incident, farming for Cain wasn't work, it was what he did to live. He loved it. You've heard the phrase, some people live to work and some people just work to live. He lived to work. He couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go out. From here on out, every time, if he is tending the ground, he is remembering what he did and remembering what happened. And from here on out, working, farming is simply farming in order to live. It's what I have to do. All the joy is gone. And it's going to feel like a curse, and the work is going to feel that much worse. There have been times in my life when my work has felt like I'm just working to live. And when that is the case, it feels like it is 2, 3, a magnitude times harder. But when I'm working to live, when it's my work that brings me joy and brings me life, it doesn't even feel like work at all. And I'm willing to work even harder than I would if it just feels like I'm working to live. And yet that hard work doesn't even seem like it. I think that's part of what is going on. There's also a little bit of a spoiler alert here. The consequences of Cain's sin continue, and they continue beyond this morning's passage, or the passage that I read a little while ago. God says you're going to be a fugitive and a wanderer. What does Cain do? He goes out and he starts a city. He tries to settle down. He is resisting that God says the consequence of your sin is you're going to have to be a fugitive and a wanderer the rest of your life. But Cain doesn't do that. He tries to set a city. And the consequence of that is that Adam and Eve have another son, Seth. And Cain has another son, Enoch. And Enoch, and after that, we don't know anything about Cain's line. But Seth is the line that eventually becomes Abraham, that eventually becomes David, and eventually comes to Jesus. Cain is kind of cut off from human history in a sense, and Seth, the other son, the line comes through him. I really wonder if Cain had accepted the consequences of his sin and moved forward in accepting those consequences, if maybe God wouldn't have allowed him to be the one who eventually fathered Abraham and David and then Jesus. It's hard to know, but what we do know is there is grace here. Cain says, this is too much for me. And in some ways, Cain has just killed his brother. What he should receive, perhaps, is capital punishment. And being told, well, you're going to be a fugitive and a wanderer, and your farming is going to be a whole lot harder for you. Well, that's just too much for me, God. And then he says, and anybody that sees me, they're going to kill me anyway. They're going to take their vengeance on me. And God says, no, they won't. Because I'm going to put my mark on you, and everyone will know they are not to touch you because my mark is on you. And there's been a lot of speculation over the years. Well, what was the mark of Cain? We really don't know what it was, but one of the ways that I like to see it is it's almost like in a time of warfare, if somebody comes with a white flag for a truce because they want to have a conference so that we can maybe settle on terms or come up with some, whatever we're going to do next, whatever. Well, even though that person is the enemy, even though they have been shooting at you, maybe in many ways they deserve to die, with that white flag, you honor the white flag and you don't kill them, but you kind of hear them out. And I see that a little bit like that. The other thing I see here is that every single human being, regardless of what they have done, and Cain has committed one of the worst crimes I can imagine, killing your sibling, fratricide, but regardless of what evil any other human being has done, the mark they carry on them is they are made in the image of God. And that doesn't exempt them from the consequences of their sin any more than you and I are exempted from the consequences of our sin. But it does mean that they are to be offered grace. And God graces Cain right here by saying, I'm putting my mark on you, and no one else is to harm you. The consequences that Cain has to suffer are consequences God puts on him, not necessarily what other people put on him. And that's pretty powerful, I think. Cain doesn't deserve that, but God grants it, and that, of course, is the very definition of grace. And so just to sum up a few quick summary lessons. First, we are to give God of our very best, and that is actually good for us. God says to Cain, if you do the right thing, isn't that going to be good for you? Won't you be accepted? We are to give God our very best because that's what we were created to do. If I give to my spouse, my wife, my very, very best, and work really hard to give of her my very best and sacrifice and let my love be a self-sacrificial love, that's actually going to be good for me too. Our relationship is going to grow and it's going to thrive, particularly if she is doing the same back to me. That's what we were created to do. But if I just sit back and wait for her to serve me and her to do everything and me see how many benefits I get, well, eventually our relationship is going to get stale and it's going to die. So God says, do the right thing, and that's going to be ultimately best for you. The second thing is that, again, we are to be angry, but to sin not. We're going to have emotions, and that's okay. God gets angry too. What do we do with those emotions is so powerful. Sin is crouching at the door, and a moment's surrender to anger can forever change our lives and others' lives. And that's exactly what we see with Abel. If he had thought it through, if he had taken time to simmer down a little bit, if he'd realized that he was really angry with himself and should have been angry with himself, he never would have done what he did. But what he did destroyed Abel's life. It destroyed Adam and Eve's lives in many ways, and it destroyed his life, and it even ultimately ended to his line ending. All of those consequences for a moment's lapse. And so we need to be aware of that. And then finally, we need to know that although God doesn't exempt us from the earthly consequences of our sin, God does grace us, and through Jesus, God does exempt us from the ultimate consequences of our sin. And it's almost as if we see this in microcosm almost in this story. Cain says, I'm going to die. This is going to cause me to die. And God says, no. Although you probably deserve death, I'm going to exempt you from death, and I'm going to save you from death by this mark that I put on you. Again, in Jesus Christ, who puts himself between us and death, God says, although you deserve death, I am going to sacrifice myself for you, and you're not going to have to experience ultimate death, but you can experience eternal life with me. I'm not letting go of the relationship, even though I ought to. And the story tells us that as well, because God continues to converse with Cain even after Cain's sin. I'm not giving up on you, even though perhaps in some ways Cain ends up giving up on God. And so we are reminded in this wonderful story that sin has consequences, but God's grace is so much greater than our sin, so much greater than our badness. And so let us move forward in our lives in those truths, living them out with joy and with purpose. Amen.